Welcome to Büyük Resim. I'm Osman Ural. The Gulen Movement, also known as Hizmet, has been one of the hottest issues both in Turkey and abroad, especially after the failed coup attempt in 2016 in Turkey. The Hizmet followers or sympathizers have been facing persecution and torture under Erdogan regime. Gulen Movement is one of the most popular faith-based movements arose from the Muslim society in the 20th century. I'm going to talk about the Hizmet Movement with Professor Anwar Alam, a senior fellow, and he recently published a book about Hizmet Movement. Welcome, Dr. Anwar Alam.
Thank you.
As an academician, how do you describe the Hizmet movement and what is its difference with other movements in the world?
As far as I am concerned and my understanding about Hizmet movement is concerned, based on my decade-long research, both on the basis of my analytical reading of literatures and the ideas of Fethullah Gulen, as well as my interaction with the volunteers within the Hizmet movement, within Turkey and the outside, I would be in a position to say that Hizmet movement is not only a great idea, but it's also, for me also, it's a great experience in fact. This is the only movement probably in the world with its Islamic background and with its Islamic tradition, which is like Gandhian philosophy, does not have any other perception of other in fact. And that has made the movement remarkably very inclusive, a movement which is committed to uphold the principle of pluralism, which is committed to uphold the principle of diversity, and which is trying to promote peace and stability through the medium of education, through the medium of dialogue, and through the medium of participation in democracy.
As you know, that the Hizmet movement has been labeled as terrorist organization by Turkish government after the failed coup attempt in 2016. How do you see that decision of Turkish government?
I think if you try to scrutinize the Turkish decisions of labeling Hizmet movement as a terrorist organization, that declaration on any scale and on any legal principles, on any definition of terrorism or any other criteria meets even the minimum definition of the terrorism, and therefore what has happened in Turkey is the mockery of the whole idea of fighting terrorism as such. Therefore, the Turkey's case of declaring Hizmet movement as a kind of terrorist movement is one of the gross misuse of the discourse of terrorism by any state in this modern world, in fact. If you want to designate, or if you want to outlaw, or if you want to declare any organization as a terrorist organization, the minimum criteria would be two things. One is that the literature of that organization or the idea of that organization at least must promote the radicalization, must promote the enemy perception, or must cause a damage. You do not find any such things happening in terms of theories and practices of the Hizmet movement. The second criteria would be that if you look at the history of that organization, and you find in the history and the practicing of any organization that somehow it has a linkage with the violence, or it has used the violence minimally to designate any movement, in fact, as a terrorist. Hizmet movement, over the last 70 years of its lives and times and its journey globally, there is not a single incidence of any kind of the violence, directly or indirectly, committed by any volunteers of the Hizmet movement, in fact. But rather, for example, on many places they have been the victim of terrorism by the non-state terrorism as well as the state terrorism, like what Erdogan is basically doing, in fact. So I do not see any criteria, and therefore what's happening is that globally, no matter what Erdogan is saying about Hizmet movement, the world is not listening to Erdogan anymore, in fact. The world doesn't believe what Erdogan is saying. And therefore, while Turkish government has closed its door, has closed the opportunities, has taken the businesses, dismissed large number of the employees, the other part of the world has opened door to the Hizmet movement, like for example in Canada, US, Europe, South Africa, and many other places where the members of the Hizmet community has been welcomed to live and to grow and to move and to build their own future and to contribute to their respective nations, in fact.
So, as an academician, how do you see the Hizmet's future, and do you have any suggestion for Hizmet movement?
I think is that what has happened in Turkey in July 2016, this so-called military, this failed military coup, it does appears that it has very significantly damaged the Hizmet movement, both in terms of its resources and in terms of the scale of activities. So to an extent, certainly it has damaged that. But at the same time, it has also provided a very great opportunity for Hizmet people to become global, in fact. If you look at, for example, the sermon of Fethullah Gulen, since the late 1980s, he has been repeatedly requesting Turkish people, or for example, his followers or his volunteers, to go abroad, to live abroad, to do the job of dawah, to invest there, leave Turkey. He has been trying to motivate for two significant reasons. One significant reason is that Fethullah Gulen could understand that this is not the age of the nation and the nationalisms. And therefore, any kind of the close understanding of society, a close understanding of nation, is unlikely to generate the kind of development which we would like to have, in fact. This is the age of global, and this is the age of globalizations, in fact. And therefore, it will be in the interest of the Turkish people if they start going abroad, interacting with the cultures, interacting and mixing with other people, develop a global perspective, and also start participating in global opportunity structures in a legal way, in a competitive way, through educations and through other kinds of constitutionally peaceful legal means, in fact. Second is that Joseph Effendi believe is that if the commandment of Islam is to conduct dawah, which essentially mean conveying the message of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, then those Turkish or those who are attached with the Hizmet movement, they need to leave their own country, and the message of the Prophet Muhammad in terms of peace and the stability and the freedom and the friendship and the love and the other kinds of the human qualities, you must spread to the different parts. And therefore, Jose Effendi said that you must go. So if you look at this crisis, large number of Hizmet followers have started coming from the Turkey, and slowly and gradually, within very soon, you would see they would become a global community. I do not see there may be a temporary setback, but in the long run, Hizmet movement is likely to come up with a very resourceful global movement, I think within a decade or two, very fast, because Hizmet movement has, unlike other Islamic movement, it has all the ingredients which are otherwise required to move towards the future of development. Like for example, Hizmet movement is probably the only movement in the world that has invested heavily into the human resources. So it has large educated human resources, in fact. Second thing is that it is spread in more than 150 countries. Therefore, it has one of the largest network, in fact. Hizmet movement is also called a trust-based movement, which is a very important factor, in fact. I have conducted the interview, and they would say that I would always pray for any Hizmet institution to travel and this and that, So you do find, in fact, the fourth is, which is very important, is that Hizmet has inculcated a very high degree of disciplined labor, actually, So if you have, for example, all these human resources, networking, trust, disciplining of the labor. The only thing is lacking is the capital, and therefore the movement always believe that it is not the capital that generate the movement, but it is the ideas that generate the capital, in fact, So with this movement and with these kinds of the supports which are very much available, I see the movement is very vibrant. It can emerge, it can mobilize its own people, and therefore I see the future is very bright for the Hizmet movement. They need not to be so despondent and disappointment. In fact, Alhamdulillah, I believe that Hizmet movement has given them educational capital, and the most important capital with Fethullah Gulen and the Hizmet movement had given to them is this, that they have uplifted their followers from any kind of conspiracy theory, actually. The Hizmet movement has cultivated confidence among their movie to move to the globe with a confidence, interact without any thinking that your Iman is likely or your Islam is likely to compromise or your Iman is likely to get diluted, in fact. I remember I was interviewing one of the head of the Hizmet in India, actually, and I asked this a specific question: what is that the Hizmet movement has given to you? And he answered me that well, Professor Alam, if I have to answer your question, is that Hizmet movement has given me this confidence that I can move the globe with Muslim identity without any kind of fear of compromising my Islamic faith. And that was indeed very remarkable. Most of the Islamic movement you see globally, most of the Muslims, when they travel abroad here, and they are haunted with the idea of the compromise of the Islamic faith, and therefore they distrust the host institution, they distrust the host society, they distrust the host culture, and they try to live in a cell, in fact. Hizmet movement is the only movement that has a remarkable knowledge, resources, which enable them to interact with the larger society and interact with the larger society. So I do not see any problem why the Hizmet movement will not be resourceful in coming years and will not be contributing to the world positively in coming years. So in a way, yes, we have a temporary setback, but it's a temporary setback, Hizmet movement has a capacity to overcome this crisis and move forward.
And during your research of Hizmet movement, you met with Mr. Fethullah Gulen. Would you please elaborate about your first impression and his personality?
Well, I had met in 2016, that is 2017, and that essentially means after met him for the first time after this failed military coup. And what happened after the military coup and the state cracked down on the Hizmet followers and their property and their life, and large number put in jail. I was really thinking is that Fethullah Gulen must be very hard and must be probably burdened with such kind of challenges, and how to address such challenges. Actually, he must be, not only deeply concerned, but probably he will be extremely having a difficulty to deal with situation, because large number of innocent people are suffering because of their association with him. The fact of the matter is that, so there is a tremendous pressure upon him how to deal with such kind of situations. So it is essentially in this context, when I met him, I was really very surprised, because when I saw him, I found him very calm, and I found him very composed, actually. And it appears to me that because of his personality, it looks to him that this is not something a very serious, but it is something a very minor thing into the human history that has happened. And this is likely to go something very soon. I was really surprised that through his body movement and through his body language, that he's not only totally control over the situations actually, but he actually believes that this is something very minor actually, that has happened to the human history, and that will go away with the time. And Hizmet has a capacity and capability to overcome this crisis, in fact. So that was a big surprise to me, I must say this. And I think his leadership, rather specifically speaking, his moral leadership, his spiritual leaderships, has demonstrated those qualities to sustain those movements, globally, sometimes I really believe that what has happened in Turkey, if it would have happened, let's say after Fethullah Gulen, then what would have been situation? It has happened in his lifetime, and therefore he would be really in position to manage of all the emerging contradiction, all the emerging crises, all the emerging hopelessness, and actually steering the movement in the rightful direction, actually, through his spiritual intervention. That's what I felt like.
So for the first meeting, what has he given to you
Well, I found, to be very honest, I was surprised because I have met many important personalities. But I did find, it would be difficult for me to express in words about his personality. But I must say that I did find a kind of this sparking light on his face. There was a sparking light on his face, which is very unusual, I must say this. That kind of sparking light is probably I have not come across. There are many prime ministers and many presidents, but it was a very different kind of. And I think that becomes only possible when a person is internally very, not only the Sufi oriented, internally transparent, but die-hard moral and ethical, actually, which only knows how to give it to the society, which doesn't know how to take it, actually. He is the person who always gives to society, who constantly thinking about the betterments of world, who is constantly thinking about how to generate peace, how to generate hope, how to bring stability, how to deal with the conflict situations, in fact, And that's what I find is a remarkable person from this point of view, remain very calm, remain very peaceful. But that was something when I met for the first time that was very surprising when I look at his sparking light on his face, actually. That I must admit. Many people would have a similar experiences, but perhaps they would not admit that. But I would like to admit, that's for sure.
Okay, let's talk about your latest book named
oh my God.
For the sake of Allah. Would you please elaborate about your book a bit?
Well, this is the book which has almost taken me almost 10 years of my research, actually. So it's a detailed books. In terms of methods, the methods includes the discipline of political economy and political sociology, the comparative and analytical understanding, actually, apart from the empirical one. So more than 75 interviews are there, countless interactions are there, everything is there, in fact. When I was thinking deeply what to give a title, actually, then every times the title that comes to my mind is essentially this: For the Sake of Allah. So this title does not represent in any way that I am a religious person, or I have any kind of the theological background, or I am having expertise into the Islamic studies, but rather as a layman or as a lay person, as someone who doesn't know much about the Islam, and someone who has a very different kind of the background. At one point of time, I was involved in a Communist Party for almost 10 years, actually. But I realize, and to my understanding of the Hizmet movement, actually, this word "for the sake of Allah" actually represent the true spirit of the Hizmet people for two reasons. One reason for me is that the entire discourse of Fethullah Gulen, who is popularly called, affectionately called, with respect he is called as Huzefendi. So the entire discourse of Hizmet movement, as reflected into the teachings, the behavior of Hizmet followers, based on my interaction with them, is this, that they are all concerned how to recenter the discourse of ethics and morality in public life, both in public life and the private life, how to recenter globally, irrespective of your religious tradition, irrespective of your caste, any other national tradition. This is something which is really important. Second is that I realize is that Hizmet is all about for the sake of Allah and providing services and serving generation and serving others for the sake of Allah without any expectation. Therefore, the Hizmet movement, for the sake of Allah, the title in the book actually actually expresses the collective expression of all the Hizmet volunteers in the movement. So I wanted to capture that collective expression and the collective. So that's the sake of Allah actually it comes. The third important reason why I have titled the book is this. See, in an age in which we are living is that there is somehow the section of the Muslim community and Muslim youth, and they are somehow, indulging in the suicide bombing and becoming a terrorist. There's real terrorist danger and challenges to this civilized society, and they are all doing in the name or for the sake of Allah also. They're also doing in the name of Allah. Therefore, what is happening is that in the large number, in the mind of the large number of people globally, Islam has somehow come to associate it with the violence, in fact, And therefore, through Hizmet movement, this misperception of Islam is being changed. And therefore, for the sake of Allah, is also an attempt to demonstrate and to present a face of Islam before that for the sake of Allah, the real meaning of it is to love, peace, friendship, cooperation, working hard, be truthful. That's the real meaning of doing anything in the name of Allah. So there are these 3 and the 4 reasons why I have chosen the title for the sake of Allah, and the rest of the narrations actually in the books moves on this line actually.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Anwar Alam, for joining us.
Thank you very much for this kind invitations, in fact, and it was pleasant talk to you.